Hello and welcome to the next episode of my tutorial series Keyboard and Theory Basics on Synthesizers. So let me recap. We've spoken about the keyboard, we've spoken about the names of the notes and how those relate to the piano staff. We've talked about sharps and flats, intervals, we've discussed rhythm, we've done some improvisation using a single note. We've discussed the concept of keys and scales, we've improvised on the pentatonic scale, we've introduced the circle of fifths and the concept of modal scales, and we've improvised on some of the 7-note or diatonic scales as they're called. We've discovered the concept of stronger and weaker notes with respect to a scale. So today we're going to talk about chromatics, but first let's recap a little bit about what we mean when we say strong and weak tones. So let's think about the C major scale. So it's a scale I'm sure we're very familiar with, and it's made of all the white notes. But what is a stronger or weaker note? Well, it's a note that sounds the most comfortable in the harmonic context that that scale implies. This is most relevant when you're playing along to chords. So what are strong and weak notes? Well, the C root is the strongest note in the scale. The rest of the C major pentatonic scale are slightly weaker. The 7 is weaker still, and the 4 is weaker still. You may notice there are 5 other notes on the keyboard which we haven't actually used, and they can be used, but they are weaker than this 4th, and therefore they must be played with a certain degree of sensitivity comparable to how we play weaker notes. What does that mean? It means that we play them less frequently than the other notes. It means that we play them typically only in passing. And it means that we don't hold them for long when we do play them. So, what's the chromatic notes, or how do we know which of these notes to play? Well, let's start with probably the most commonly referred to chromatic. It's just called a blue note. And the blue note is usually added to the minor pentatonic scale. So, C minor pentatonic, C, E flat, F, G, B flat, C. The blue note is the flat 5 or G flat, also known as F sharp. So I'm just going to add it to the scale so you can hear the sound. So hopefully you can hear that bluesy tone that it adds already. Let's do a really quick improvisation just so you can hear it in context. So you'll hear I played it a couple of times then, and hopefully it gave you a feel of the color that these type of chromatics can add to your playing. The way that I played that there was what's commonly called a crush note, where I will aim for the black note, I will hit the corner of the note and drop onto the adjacent white note. So that's an interesting way of playing it in passing and playing it very briefly. Probably you're asking yourself, well, how do I know the flat 5 is the blue note? And is it always the flat 5? Well, let's play C major pentatonic, and let's add the flat 5. So to me, that doesn't sound like that blue note that we heard before. The blue note is actually distinctive because it represents a tritone in the scale. But it represents a tritone with respect to a harmonic center which corresponds to all of the notes and not just one note. So let me draw a parallel. With the pentatonic scales, we used the C major pentatonic and we looked at the relative modes to decide which notes should lie in those modes pentatonics, because the function of the notes is effectively equivalent. So let's look at a minor scale using the same notes as C, so specifically A minor, a relative minor scale to C major, And let's look where the flat 5 lives. So the sound, I can recognize it's that blue note sound. And where is it? It is the flat 5 or the E flat. So let's see what happens if we add the E flat to the C major pentatonic. So I think you'll agree that that has that same bluesy sound to the flat 5th in the minor pentatonic context. So we can use this same method to place this blue note in any of the modal scales. Let's play a little improvisation here. So again, you can hear that bluesy tone comes out. Now we've spoken about blue notes, let's think of other chromatics that we can introduce. Well, in the discussion on modal scales, I mentioned the possibility of harmonically borrowing chords from adjacent scales. And in fact, there is a concept in the minor scales that uses this. Now, we've spoken only about one of the 3 common minor scales. The one that we've spoken about is the natural minor, C natural minor. And note that that contains the flats in the order you would expect them to be contained, meaning it can be represented with a key signature. However, the other 2 natural minor scales are not represented by a key signature typically. They're represented as though those additional notes were chromatic. How do we know they're chromatic? Well, that's because there is an accidental or a sharp or flat written next to them, or even a natural written next to them in the scale. So how do we make these other minor scales? Well, one of the other minor scales is called the harmonic minor. And what we do with it is we make the minor 7 into a major 7. In other words, we make the 7th natural. So the key signature of C minor would be 3 flats. But when we want to play this note in this other scale, we use a natural sign next to the B. So it's a B natural. So I'm going to play it ascending and descending. So hopefully you could hear the unusual sound that that 3 chromatic step interval here made. People often describe it as sounding maybe Middle Eastern. Again. Because of that sound, of the quite distinctive interval, there is a second scale which is used not for harmony or chords, but for melody. And this is usually called the melodic minor. And to make that, instead of just making the flat 7 natural, we also make the flat 6 natural. So you can hear then that the sound is quite different, but it's used even more specifically than that in a typical Western musical context. And that is to say that you play the melodic minor when ascending, and you play the natural minor when descending. The harmonic minor is used for chords. So let's play ascending on the melodic minor, descending on the natural minor. So you can see how there are 2 chromatics that were introduced in this. So let's play a little improvisation using that. So we played additional tones, borrowed, you can think of, from the major scale. In fact, that's the relationship we can think of here, and there is another note from the major scale we could have borrowed, which is the 3. So let's try and use that too. So, like before, on ascending I used my chromatic, and descending I went back down the scale. So in this case, I've introduced 3 chromatics, and they sound out of scale, but they do not sound inharmonious. Now, if we were playing in a harmonic context, that's to say with chords playing behind us, we may have to be more careful with these, but I think they can add a lot of interesting color. The final type of chromatic that I'd like to introduce is a glissando. Now, whether you know the name or not, you've probably done a glissando when approaching a piano, like this. So a glissando is a fast run of notes. One thing to be aware of is usually for a glissando it's more important that you end at the right time than when you start the glissando. The end point is usually very important. So if I was playing a C minor pentatonic, hopefully you can hear that I try to land on that note on the beat. So a glissando includes chromatics if we glissando the white notes and the scale does not only contain white notes, or we glissando the black notes and the scale doesn't only contain black notes. So for example, E flat minor pentatonic is only black notes. So if I play a glissando, then everything is in key. Regarding the mechanics of playing these things, typically a piano key's edge is quite sharp, so you want to be fairly delicate. You don't want to apply too much force. People tend to use the backs or sides of their fingers. You can use the fronts, but they tend to stick a little bit more. If you're playing on an organ, the keys are very rounded at the edge and not sharp, so often people they'll use their palm to do the slide. So now we've introduced several types of chromatic. I'll start a little beat going, and I will try and play an improvisation in which I will hopefully illustrate all of the chromatic uses that I've been discussing. Okay, so I hope I've demonstrated that the use of chromatics can add some color and interest to the music that you play, and hopefully it can also help you get out of a rut it's easy to get into, where you get stuck playing the minor pentatonic scale the whole time. I think that's everything I wanted to discuss today, so I'd like to say thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've been enjoying the series, and I hope you will come back and watch some of the remaining videos in this series. But in any case, most importantly, thank you for watching and goodbye.